American college students at Ivy League universities are not able to read full books. That's what 33 professors at these top universities are saying about their freshman students. Joining me now to discuss this issue and the potential causes is Michele Exner, Senior Advisor at Parents Defending Education. Michele Exner, thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Michele, there's students all over the country right now making their ways into college. There's professors from schools like Columbia, Georgetown, Stanford. They're saying that students are struggling with reading full books and that these students have never had to do so before. Talk to us, how common is this issue in American middle and high school?
You know, it was alarming. I read that same headline, and of course, as a parent, as someone who advocates on behalf of education in America, it was scary, right? Because this is an indicator of the future workforce of our country, but also it shouldn't be surprising, right? When you look at the national report card that we use to really track assessments and where students are across the country, we're not doing well, in particular when it comes to reading. So the last tests that were administered back in 2022 showed that only about 30% of fourth graders were reading at a proficient level, right? And for eighth graders, it was about 64% that were not reading at their grade level. And across the board, there were actually about 40% of students that are not reading at their grade level. And also, I think it's important to note that these numbers are still behind 2019, right? So we have not recovered that academic loss from the COVID policies.
What do you think has led to these schools not reading complete an entire book?
Absolutely. So I have a couple of theories, right, on just things and stories that we've gathered from that's happening from across school districts in America. So I think first is I'm not sure that students are getting the critical training that they need to process information, right, large amounts of information. I don't think they're learning to critically read in school. Second, I think it's still residual impact of COVID, right? I think that's why you're seeing that the scores have still not recovered from 2019, right? I mean, that was, in many cases, 2 years of education completely lost. I think another one, and this is a main one, is a completely misalignment of the priorities of these schools, right? You're seeing a lot of examples where things like race, gender ideology, are being prioritized over math, reading, science, and history, and also an attack on merit, right? Where we're seeing that it's almost a bad, merit opportunities have been, in some cases, just taken away from some of these school districts. And so I think that is just kind of a summary of some of the issues that we're seeing.
So, I mean, there's so many different factors hitting us from all different angles, whether it's artificial intelligence now getting involved in the classroom. What would you say is ultimately some of the biggest benefit that you would receive from reading some of these classic texts?
Oh, absolutely. I think one, just processing that complex information, right, when you're reading these classical books. And also, I think, and it was the professors cited in this article, right, it was about 33 of them, so quite a large portion there. And that said that over the past 20 years, they had noticed that students just cannot consume that type of information. They, in the past would be able to go from one Pride and Prejudice to another major novel. And now students are saying we're overwhelmed, right? And so I think if we, the benefit of reading critically, really it transcends past their academic careers to whatever they choose to do post their academic journeys, right? Reading is fundamental. It's a basis to anything they decided to do. So it's really important as a country that we get this right. And I really see that article, and I think it's really stats that we knew generally, right? As we've taken on the test scores and we're seeing how schools are doing, how students are performing. It's really a national emergency, right? And so we really need to get this right, get focused. And I think the next administration in there really needs to make academic excellence, right? They need to get all this other extraneous things out of the classroom, because any minute not spent on math, reading, proficiency, reading these classical books that will help students succeed, any minute not spent on that is really detracting them from future potential.
And lastly, to your point of students being overwhelmed and feeling overwhelmed, there's a lot of feedback from the classroom that students often struggle with attention to detail and attention span. Is social media playing any part part in this, do you think?
Absolutely, and actually that was one of the points that I was going to mention earlier of the issues why I think we are where we are, is the overstimulation, right? Kind of this, the addiction to screens and cell phones and you know, social media. So I think it's really, and that's at every level, right? As a parent, you know, our children are not going to have smartphones for a while, and so I'm sorry, but that's just because it's really, I think it's affecting their focus, right? And it's affecting students across the board in classrooms. And so I think that is a huge factor and something that we need to really take a look at every level from parents in the home to leaders at every level of government. Really need to be looking at this issue.
Michele Exner, really appreciate you shedding some light on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.